Hey everybody, we're back for chapter 2 of When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And we come to the second chapter, and it's a really important chapter because Kushner is going to try to um, get us to think in a new way about about God and about what we can expect from God. So, jumping right in, the second chapter is called A Story of a Man Named Job. And hopefully you know the story of Job, but if you don't, really quickly, a man who has everything. God and the devil are kind of arguing about. God is proud of him. The devil's like, well, he has everything, so of course he's good. And God's like, well, go ahead, test him, and we'll see what happens. So everything is taken away from Job, right? His family, his business, his children, even his health is terrible. And then his friends come to him and are like, "Oh, this is terrible, Job. We're so sorry. What did you do wrong?" And Job's like, "Whoa, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong to deserve this. I have no idea why this is happening to me. Why is this happening to me?" And so his friends argue back and forth with Job about this. And they're like, "Well, we thought we had you pegged as a good person, but here you are questioning God." Because back in the day, they understood that God um, only did things to people. If something bad happened to somebody, it was because you did something bad. They really believed that, right? If you were out like tending your crops and there was a drought, it wasn't because like there just wasn't any rain, right? And the weather conditions didn't weren't awesome. It was that you did something wrong. And so they were surprised that Job would say, I didn't do anything wrong. And so there's an argument back and forth for many chapters between Job's friends and Job. And finally Job is fed up and he calls God out a little bit and says, "Hey, why did you do this to me? You have to answer to this or take it all back." And God comes down and actually answers Job. And with that, and it's not the answer that we're expecting. It's kind of, "Hey, do you know what it's like being me? Do you know what it's like being God and all the things that I have to do?" And Job's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be good." And Job gets all his stuff back. It's a strange answer, but Kushner takes it in a different direction here. And on page 42, he goes through and he kind of establishes this idea that there are really and three things that we'd like to believe. We'd like to believe that God is all powerful. We'd also like to believe that God is good. God is just and fair and wants good for us, right? He wants good things for us. And the third thing is that Job is a good person, or that we are a good person, right? We want to believe all these three things. The problem is when we come to tragedy, you can't believe all of those three things at the same time. You can believe two, but you can't believe all three. So you have to give up on one. So it's possible you can believe that God is all powerful and in control of everything and he wants good things, but you've been bad and so you get what you deserve. That's eliminating C, the third thing. Job is a good person, or we are a good person. But that's the thing we know. We know that we haven't done some terribly cruel thing to justify such a terrible punishment, right? Or such a terrible thing happening to us. So that actually is the thing we're most certain of. We are certain that we are a good person. And so we don't deserve this tragedy. That's the easiest one. So now we're left with two. We could believe that as God is all powerful and that God is not just and fair, that God isn't good, right? He can control all things, he can control all time and space, he can control all nature, but he, just doesn't feel like it, right? He's not just and fair. He likes seeing us squirm a little bit. Well, if that were the case, who would even want a God like that, right? That would not be something that we would strive for. So, what are we left with? We're left with the idea that God is good and just and fair, and that He wants us to be good and taken care of, and that we know that we are good, and the possibility that God is not all powerful. Kushner on page 49 says, forced to choose between a good God who is not totally powerful or a powerful God who is not totally good, the author of the book of Job, chooses to believe in God's goodness. Because he can, if we do that, then we can still be on the side that God can still be on our side when bad things happen to us. And isn't that the most important thing? Is that when tragedy is going on in my life, I want God to be able to be there. I want God to be able to help me, and that's really important. And and I think that's the that's that's where we're left with in choosing between A, B, and C, whether or not it's all God is all powerful, all God is all good, or that we're good. So to reject the fact that God is all powerful, this is really the difficult thing of this book. Can we wrap our brains around getting rid of the concept that God is all powerful? Now, hold up. It could be that God might not be all powerful, but he could be the most powerful. Like if I went to a bar, I know that there is a bouncer, right? And he's probably the most powerful person in that bar. And as long as I'm not looking for trouble, the bouncer is a good person in the sense that if there is trouble, he'll help, right? Now, is this bouncer probably the most powerful person in the world? Probably not. But do I need him to be the most powerful person in the world in order to be effective? Or do I just need him to be the most powerful person in the bar that night, right? And so God being the most powerful is is really what we're going for. Because I can believe that I am good, that God is good, and wants good things for me and my family and for all those I love. And that God is the most powerful, but there's some things that are that God can't control. And those are those two evils in the world. And we're going to talk about them. And they're on page 49, kind of tucked in there, and I kind of picked them out. And we're going to talk about them in the next few chapters. Cruelty, and that's human cruelty. The things that we do to ourselves due to the fact that we have free will. And that free will is guaranteed to us. It's a gift that we've been given without any strings attached. God doesn't say, "Well, you weren't very good with it. I'm going to take it back." Because, and we'll talk about it later, it's what distinguishes us from other animals is our free will. The other evil in the world is chaos, the chaos of nature, right? Sometimes nature doesn't work out. Most of the days it does. Most people on most days wake up and are healthy, but occasionally and randomly, chaotically, people wake up and are not well. And that's part of why these kinds of tragedies make the news, partly because they're kind of rare. If there was a murder on every street every night, would it make the news? Probably not. But because most streets on most nights don't have murders, when occasionally there is one, it makes the news because it's not only bad and terrible, but it's also kind of rare. And so those are the two types of evil. And we're going to talk more about them in further chapters, but Kushner lays out the fact that those are things that God does not have complete control over. And we'll talk more about that. The last thing that I want to kind of cover is this idea that we can um, we will be able to turn to God for things that He can do to help us instead of holding on to the unrealistic expectations of God. And that's kind of what happens so often, right? Is people say, God, I want you to do this thing for me, almost like a cosmic vending machine. And that's not really kind of how God works. God is not at our beck and call, right? It would be like, if you ask me, could I borrow a pencil? And I'd say, okay, here, I have that, right? Um, but then you turn around and say, well, I actually would like $1,000. And I said, well, I don't have $1,000. And you're like, well, forget you. I'll never ask you for anything. That's tough to put on me if I didn't have that, if I was not able to help you in that way. And so many times we ask God for things that you know we could not possibly be able to need.